Okay, we'll finish this chapter up and hopefully go on to more study or the next chapter, depending on where you are in your class. In terms of the absorption state, in that state, most of the body cells are taking in glucose and producing ATP. So many things are happening individual cell-wise. Much ATP is being produced, and you have the ready reserves to do whatever work the body wants to do. And then after that, so about 4 hours, this is give or take depending on your metabolic rate. After your last meal, absorption in the small intestine is nearly complete. I think that's a little bit short. I think it's a little bit longer than that. But maybe that is, when the blood glucose levels start to fall, and you have a challenge to maintain blood glucose levels. They decline, so insulin secretion declines. That's a feedback system. And then glucagon is released. Glucagon will stimulate the breakdown of the stored glucose in the liver, the breakdown of fats, and then the actual making of glucose from fats. So breakdown of liver glycogen, lipolysis, so the breakdown of fats, and then also the creation of glucose molecules from fat molecules, which is the gluconeogenesis. Then you have a support with regard to the sympathetic nervous system, so you have a little help with the release of an epinephrine by the adrenal gland, and that will help directly help direct this process of breaking down the stored form of sugar, but also to start breaking down the fatty acids, not fatty acids, but the triglycerides, your stored form of energy. So the upshot of both of these, I think we're finished with this. Now here's a nice overview, is when you're absorbing nutrients, there's plenty for the cells, so anything that's left over is going to be stored, put in the stored form, whether that be skeletal muscle, liver, or your fat cells. And then in the state where you are low on blood sugar, the opposite is going to happen. Your stored form is going to be released into the bloodstream, but you will, if you end up using fat, and if you end up using fat, then you will have a byproduct of that, and that's where the ketones and the lactic acid. That's where the ketones come from. Lactic acid is if you're going through the cycle without anaerobically, without oxygen. We're going through the glycolysis cycle. A few more concepts just to finish up here. I didn't forget about the vitamins and minerals part, but there is another, it's actually the older version that has more of the vitamin mineral information in it for you to listen to. I believe this information might be in there too. Your the basal metabolic rate is you're awake but not stimulated, and you're quiet and in a room that has normal temperature, so you're not trying to stay awake. Heat is a constant. We talked a little bit about that with regard to the catabolism and anabolism, whether you're breaking down or building up. That process of breaking down molecules or building them up is always going to give off heat. That heat is expressed in calories, and generally about 9 calories for fat, 9 calories per gram, and then 4 for each, this is approximately 4 for each protein and carbohydrates. And a person, generally adults, as long as you're not training for a triathlon or something, doing an extensive amount of exercise. What I mean is an extensive amount. Your normal calories is about 12,000 to 18,000 per day. I think some of the very high quality athletes, of course, because they train so much, they need far more calories than that. And then this last idea with regard to body temperature, your body temperature is a constant, is a relative constant, 98.6, so somewhere in that range. It does fluctuate slightly, but your chemicals, your enzymes, your chemical processes, your proteins that you have in your body, everything is based on a certain temperature. So it's very important that your temperature, your core body temperature, remains constant. And your body has several ways to do this. Blood can be shunted away from your peripheral tissues. And then body temperature is regulated by your hypothalamus, plus hormones, your thyroid hormone, and the actual temperature is set, so you can think of it as the thermostat is set by your hypothalamus, but it's actually regulated by your autonomic nervous system, specifically the sympathetics, as well as hormones, and exercise in terms of heating up if you're cold. The way that heat is dissipated from the body can be conduction. Conduction is defined as heat lost to solid materials that you're in contact with. So walking barefoot on the floor, or one of the examples I think are really kind of that are kind of interesting. So if you get up from, if you sit in a chair that somebody's just been sitting in and it's all toasty warm, you get all excited about the toasty warmness. That's because their body heat was conducted into that inanimate object. Convection is like turning on a fan. So you have cool air blowing on top of your body, and so if that cool air is, it will actually suck the heat out, will transfer the heat from liquid or gas as it flows over the object. So as the fan blows over you, the heat from your body will dissipate out. Radiation, generally we think of that as coming in, although we do radiate heat too, but think of the sun's rays radiating and heating us up. Sometimes, particularly after winter, it feels so good to have that sun on your back. And then evaporation, again, you go, if you're conducting heat, meaning you're taking blood to the periphery, so away from the core to the periphery, you're also activating your sweat glands. Sweat glands then are going to, because water is an excellent conductor of heat, and generally what the body does is all of this heat that's created on metabolism, not only is the end product of that electron transport chain water. Water is a great place to put all of that additional heat so that it doesn't affect the cell, because water is an excellent conductor of heat. That heat then can diffuse throughout the whole body if just one particular area is very, very metabolically active. And then also the water that's carrying the heat into the blood, and then the blood can send that heat to the periphery, and then the sweat glands can be activated, and the heat then can evaporate. So you can evaporate the heat via the sweat that you're producing. So you have many ways to keep yourself within your core temperature 98.6, and as I said, the thermostat is neurons found in the hypothalamus. It receives information from receptors in the body, thermoreceptors, and is constantly talking back and forth to regulate the heat. If they're when blood increases, the lower frequency, higher frequency when blood increases, lower when it decreases. But hypothalamus is the thing you want to remember as setting your body temperature. Interesting thing is when you are experiencing a fever, particularly if that fever is part of your immune response to, say, a bacterial infection, that hypothalamus can reset your core body temperature so that it actually allows for a higher temperature. That's what we call a fever. And then the last idea is, image-wise, here's the last idea. I've talked about this. When the core temperature declines, you have a restriction of blood vessels. So all of this reverses with regard to heat. You don't lose heat to the atmosphere. You don't lose as much heat to inanimate objects. And so you constrict the blood. Not only that, but you also, the blood is also shunted toward the core, and your cellular metabolism increases because of the muscles contracting, otherwise known as shivering. But at any rate, your cellular metabolism is going to increase even if you aren't shivering, but it's going to increase even more so if you have muscles that are contracting. And I don't know what that MyENSUE is, but shivering muscles. We'll put muscles in there, and that's the thought. If the opposite happens, if your core body temperature rises, that's what we spent most of our time talking about. The vessels closer to the skin dilate, sweat glands are stimulated, and metabolic rate is lowered. And that is the end of this chapter, and we'll meet next time on the next chapter.